All right. So, Eric, welcome to the Byte Federal Podcast number 2. And we're so stoked to have you here today. Thank you for being our guest.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Awesome, man. Hey, look, I've been a fan of yours ever since I saw your first content on Twitter, X, and I love the connection between cannabis and Bitcoin. I love your passion. I love the gratitude that you express to be a part of all this. We share that same emotion. So as soon as I saw you, I knew this is somebody that we'd love to talk to.
Yeah, well, I appreciate hearing that, man. It's
That's awesome.
a monumentally big deal, as far as I'm concerned. Bitcoin's the biggest deal in human history, and there's a lot to be grateful for. The further you go down the rabbit hole, at least in my experience, the more grateful I am for Bitcoin
Yeah,
and all things really. So, yeah.
absolutely. That's so cool. I had coffee this morning with a guy I just met here who just is like all of us, right, trying to find other Bitcoiners, trying to find people to connect to and share everything that he's experiencing, everything that's like coming into his life, that he sees the hope, he sees the future, and he's trying to share it with as many people as possible, and just trying to fit in or find that local community to connect with. And so I feel like we can do this at a bigger scale with this podcast and from talking to people like you. So awesome. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. That's why I had to start making content. I was living in my little bubble as a hardcore Bitcoin maximalist with 100% allocation to Bitcoin. And I didn't know any other Bitcoiners. So I had to get on Twitter and start socializing. And that's been very fruitful, I will say.
That's cool. That's cool. So that leads me into my first question for you, right? So you're in Northern California.
Yep.
I'm originally a California guy, born and raised. Lived there until I was about 30 years old. And like my entire life growing up in California, I considered myself a Democrat. But when I think back to those years, like the Democratic Party that I grew up with was anti-war, anti-big business, didn't trust the government, was all things freedom associated. And when I think about the Democratic Party today, or when I see the social feeds from my friends in California, it seems like such a different world to me now compared to my experience growing up in California. And I'm wondering for you in California, I know Humboldt, right? I know that could be a little bit different than maybe what's happening in LA. That's
Definitely.
Thousands of, or I don't know how many miles apart, but
long ways.
Like long ways. But from your view as a Californian living in that environment, what is California's perception of Bitcoin?
I would say on average, most people are unaware of the magnitude of Bitcoin. I think they look at it as another speculative asset. I think a lot of, the majority of the population buys into the mainstream narrative. I am starting to get more people reaching out to me within the cannabis community in Humboldt, and beyond with questions about Bitcoin, since I've become a little more public about my Bitcoin, my affinity for Bitcoin. But I feel like it's a state that is almost like distracted with a lot of the wokeism. And so there's not a lot of attention or discussion that I'm privy to about Bitcoin in the state of California. And that may be happening with politicians or important people behind closed doors. There is also a bunch of the Silicon Valley hucksters and scam artists launching all of their shit coins. So, and I think that's dilutive of the real revolution, which is Bitcoin.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I can see it. It seems like Silicon Valley gravitates towards the tech side of things. Like, so how do we do it faster? How do we do it cheaper? How do we do our own token? How do we securitize this, securitize that, as opposed to what I think we all see as the most important aspect of Bitcoin, which is separating money from state, right? How do we put the power of money in the hands of the people and not in the hands of the government?
Yeah, and I think that most people are still really stuck in trying to figure out how to make money, and everybody's looking for the next thing. And there's saying within Bitcoin, I'm sure you're aware of, it's the final trade. I heard Saylor
Mm,
on a podcast recently, or maybe it was one of his backroom discussions in Nashville, where he's like, you spent 40 to 60,000 hours of your life making money. Maybe you should spend 100 learning how to keep it. And so I think
yeah.
that there's a little bit of a that playing out. And as the currency is debased, your ability to procure margins from the marketplace becomes perpetually harder. And so I think that also exacerbates the focus on trying to make a quick buck. Launch a startup, sell the startup, dump a bunch of coins, whatever the strategy may be, figure out
Hmm.
how to make that money really quickly. And unfortunately, a lot of people, from my perspective, are overlooking the magnitude of the long-term returns in Bitcoin relative to essentially all of the other investable assets or any other thing that you
Yeah.
could buy on planet Earth.
Yeah. The final trade is such a cool concept because, it's it really does put Wall Street on its heels, right?
Yeah.
A friend of mine, Chris Sullivan, who's a hedge fund manager, did the analysis on the S&P 500, right?
Yep.
And the dollar, depreciation of the dollar, right? So if you go
Adjusted
back to
for adjusted for M2.
no, but if you go back to just sort of the loss of purchasing power of the dollar, this is the St. Louis Fed chart of the dollar from 1913 to today, and the dramatic loss in purchasing power. And you analyze that, right? It's losing purchasing power at an average of about 11.2% a year.
Uh-huh.
And then if you look at the S&P 500, that say has an average annual return of say 9.2% a year,
Yep.
you can see that even the fiat mindset of the S&P being the ultimate savings tool, the ultimate way to hedge inflation, is still losing purchasing power.
Yeah, at 2% a year, which, as Saylor says, equates to a
Yeah,
35-year half-life. You lose half the
right.
money in 35 years. And people are stuck in this optical illusion where they think their assets are going up, but they're actually going down. You just can't see it because the metric, the dollar that you're measuring the value of the assets in, is bleeding energy faster than the asset is.
Absolutely.
One of the things that
Absolutely.
I tell people when I'm, talking about Bitcoin, which just seems like that's all I do, is
Good for
like,
you.
I don't buy, like, you don't buy a vehicle to save your economic energy or project your purchasing power into the future, but people are doing that with houses. And I explained to them that what's happening with your house is the same thing that's happening with your car. You just can't see it because you're measuring the value of the house and the dollar's losing purchasing power so fast that the house is going up in dollar terms, but the car is going down in dollar terms. Everything on planet Earth other than Bitcoin is bleeding energy. It's going down in value in real terms. As Saylor puts it, they're all defective assets.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have with Bitcoin now, if we have a average rate of return of, let's just say 50%, right? It's
Yeah,
sometimes lower than that, sometimes higher than that. Um, when you think about that, that reframes everything. And I think this is probably why you and I are in this 100% allocation,
totally.
because it reframes everything in regards to the way you value every other possible investment, career path,
Yep.
anything you can do to generate economic value for yourself and your family. And so when you start measuring the world against Bitcoin, really clarifies for you what's important and what adds value and what doesn't.
Totally. I was listening to a Jeff Booth podcast recently. I believe it was with Walker, and he was talking about ego death capital, and he's projecting essentially for the next 15 years a 45% compound annual growth rate for Bitcoin. So any capital that they're going to invest into a business, they need to be expecting to get a yield higher than 45%. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that's a really
It's a
big deal.
hurdle.
And it's hard for people to wrap their mind around that reality. And
Yep.
then you got the Peter Schiffs of the world dispelling a bunch of FUD, and you got people on mainstream media. And I believe to a certain degree that there's a psyop taking place. When I saw Jamie Dimon on CNBC mispronounce Satoshi's name, he called him Satoshi and said, well, maybe Satoshi is going to come back and double the supply to 42 million coins. The first thing I thought is this guy is lying. He is the
Yeah.
CEO of JP Morgan Chase. He's famous for waking up early and reading every morning. You're going to tell me that this guy doesn't understand Bitcoin in the most basic of levels? Because the only way to
Right.
get somebody's Bitcoin is to sell them a shit coin or to
Hmm.
get them to not buy it. That's the only way to dilute to dilute the value of the asset, is to prevent people from buying it. And so I do
Yeah,
think that there's a little
absolutely.
bit of that happening, in an attempt to slow this thing down and allow people with a lot of power and resources to figure out how they're going to grapple with this. It's kind of like a freedom grenade was thrown into the room of all of the overlords, and everybody's like, "Oh shit! Like, nobody move. We gotta don't touch it. Let's figure out how to deal with this thing. It's gonna rip some faces off. Like, nobody move. We're gonna
Yep.
calmly discuss how we're gonna deal with this."
Yep. 100%. And I think I know, a lot of people either don't know or forgot that JP Morgan had a whole division that was doing a ton of research and development on the Ethereum blockchain that they then later sold to Consensus,
Interesting.
which, happened to take place, I'm sure, with a significant amount of ETH,
Yeah.
and happened to take place before they transitioned to proof of stake. So, you can connect those dots however you want.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to think into the future of a staking protocol basically being dominated by those with the largest stake, and wherever those coins are being staked by the largest players, essentially having control of this chain. So I've always seen Ethereum as just Wall Street 2.0 with self custody. And but there's no real innovation there. It's really about taking the true innovation, which is Bitcoin, porting it over to how do we use this to generate Wall Street in this new digital fabric that allows us to be a part of that momentum and be a part of that future digital growth, while at the same time eliminating some of the transfer agents and the custodians that the big banks probably don't need anymore now that something like Ethereum exists.
Yeah, totally. Very well said. And I think of it as like an extension of fiat. It's an additional centralizing, consolidating protocol or force. It's
Yeah,
it's it's no better than fiat. If anything, it's a little scummier in some ways, in my humble opinion.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. All right, I want to step back. Like I watched your presentation in Prague,
Hmm.
and that was the first time I heard your full story. Um, and it really hit me immediately as like the similarities of sort of like the experiences you've had in your life that led you to Bitcoin, and my own experiences and other Bitcoiners that I've got to know over the years. And that's sort of this I like to describe as this history of, number one, losing faith in the traditional financial system.
Hmm.
Number two, like losing faith in, well, and in your case, like the pharmaceutical industry,
Totally.
right? Through the experience with your mom,
Yep.
and the sort of these personal losses that we all sort of carry with us into the future. It's like, to me, that's sort of like priming the pump,
Totally.
or waking an individual up to get to the point where they, like, when they find Bitcoin, they go, this is it. This is why
Yeah.
I'm here. This is the answer. And I think prior, at least for myself and many others I've talked to, prior to Bitcoin, we were all a little bit nihilistic, like, just like, how, like, the future is screwed. Like, we're behind in so many ways, and how are we ever going to dig out of this hole? And then Bitcoin is all of a sudden this beacon, right? This light at the end of the tunnel. Where you're like, I have to get there as fast as possible.
Yep.
So you kind of described that in Prague, and I'm wondering if you can just kind of, like, for our audience, briefly describe your story and kind of relate that, if that's the feeling that is in
Yeah.
you as well.
Definitely. So I grew up in Southern California. My parents divorced when I was 5 years old. My mother remarried rather quickly to a psychiatrist, and she ended up going back to school and getting a doctorate degree in sociology. And rather quickly, early on in that marriage, she got into pharmaceuticals. antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication. And so I grew up in a family, nobody was drinking alcohol or smoking cigarettes. Like we were, rather well together in that sense. Doctorate degree parents. But the pharmaceuticals clearly changed her and degraded the quality of her life. And so by the time I was a teenager, I was like 15 years old and I got introduced to cannabis for the first time. And so I started smoking weed with some of my friends, and it really was a catalyst for me to think outside of the box, to think, okay, so wait a second, this isn't some gnarly, despicable, crazy drug, but I'm looking at this pharmaceutical use that seems to have a tremendous impact on all of my family members who are using it. And what it ended up happening over the long term is when I was 20 years old, my mother ended up committing suicide because she was so depressed, and the things that she was doing to try to make her life better weren't. They were basically zombifying her out or numbing her ability to feel the things. And I think that pain or emotional anguish in some sense is like a guidance system. If you feel bad about something, there's an underlying issue for why you feel bad about it. And if you take a bunch of medication to just numb yourself from the pain, you're not actually solving the problem. And so that kind of fueled me quite heavily to get into cannabis. And in some sense, it was like a little bit of a vengeance. Like every time I bag a pound and sell a pound into the marketplace, it's like an FU to big pharma. And so when I was 25 years old, I was invited to Northern California by a friend who knew I had an affinity for cannabis. She had come up here and moved to go to Humboldt State University, and she invited me to come and trim at a medical marijuana farm at the time. And so I took the opportunity, and as soon as I got here, I knew exactly where I was going to be and what I was going to do, and I've been here ever since. And that led me to being in the right place, you could say, at the right time. In 2015, the governor, Jerry Brown, at the time, signed into effect MRSA, which is the Medical Marijuana Safety Regulations Act, which was going to put into place the basic regulatory framework for the counties and the state to permit and then license cannabis activity for the assumed legalization for recreational use. And so I ended up purchasing a property in consultation with Humboldt County Planning Department, submitted a permit application to get a cultivation permit so that I could have a licensed farm. I ended up getting permitted in record times. I was one of the first people to receive my permit, and I was then licensed in 2018. So I bought the property essentially at the end of 2015, went through the permit process. By 2017, I was permitted by the county. In 2018, I was licensed by the state. And it was the first property that I had purchased. As soon as I closed escrow, at that time, in my personal experience, now I had this enormous incentive to understand what I was actually in the midst of. What was I dealing with? What causes these real estate boom bust cycles? When in 2008, when the economic crisis hit in 2008, I was selling cars for a Toyota dealership in Southern California. And I was 21 years old, and I definitely saw firsthand the pullback in the economy and the inability for people to continue to purchase like they were pre-2008. But I didn't have the capacity or the incentive at the time to really dig deep and understand what was happening. I was kind of dealing with the own trials and tribulations of being a young man trying to find his place in the world and figure out what I was going to do and where I was going to go and how I was going to sustain myself. So in 2016, when I'm standing on this property, 17-acre, nice parcel here in Humboldt County with a house, I just started to relentlessly listen to YouTube and audiobooks about the history of money, the Federal Reserve, the boom bust cycles. And it took about 6 to 9 months until I was led to Bitcoin. And I was very, very well primed to understand the magnitude of Bitcoin based upon simple supply and demand dynamics, because over the preceding or the 5 years prior to this, I had essentially watched the pound price of cannabis plummet. It went from $3,000 a pound to like $1,000 a pound in like 5 years. And I couldn't articulate exactly what was happening at the time like I can now, thanks to like the Sailor series and Jeff Booth's work and looking at the world through the lens of Bitcoin. but I essentially understood very deeply that if you had a monetary instrument that should essentially have infinite demand as long as it succeeds and it exists, that is truly finite, you have, like Saylor would say, the apex asset, the apex property of the human race. And so the discovery of Bitcoin, and didn't take me very long. It took me maybe a month of going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole to realize that I had a real issue, and that what I thought was my dream come true in getting a license from the state of California, which is a very vindicating moment in my life. I'm standing there on this property in the beginning of 2018, at the very beginning of the issuing of licenses. I received my license, and I'm like, dang, this is a monumentally big deal for me in my life, and it is an absolute nightmare. I need to get out of this property, and I need to sell the business and pivot my strategy, because I had a strong suspicion that the trend was going to continue and the value of the product was going to go down based upon simple supply demand dynamics. If you have demand for something in the marketplace and you have a decent margin, that margin is an economic incentive for other people to move into that sector of the marketplace and produce whatever it is and satiate that demand with supply. And at the same time, I'm watching, over the prior 10 years or previous 10 years, the cost of everything that I need to live and run my business is increasing. So I'm dealing with dollar denominated wage deflation and dollar denominated inflation into my operating and living expenses. So I concluded that I was best off selling the property and offering farm management services, because I'm rather good at what I do. I've been doing it for a very long time. And so that's what I did. I sold my property. I stuck a chunk into Bitcoin, and started doing farm management services. And then over the next few years, I started to become progressively more and more obsessed with Bitcoin. And when the Saylor series hit, that was when I developed the 100% conviction, because I kind of I had a suspicion that, or a concern that the governments would try to shut it down or create some extreme regulatory impedance of some sort that was going to stifle Bitcoin's long-term growth. But also as an individual in my early 30s, having a little bit of a revolutionary fuck you to the man attitude. Now, mind you, I'm compliant. I'm not a very large risk taker, which is why I decided to go through the licensing model, and is also why I hold all of my money in Bitcoin. But I kind of had the attitude of like, I'm gonna support this network in this revolution by putting my energy into it, by buying my coins and putting my money into the network. And if it succeeds, then that's good, and I think I'm contributing to the long-term success of a better future for humanity. And if it fails, then I'll restart and rebuild and move forward with my life. And so, I think that at this point, as they say, the toothpaste is not going back in the tube. I think it's pretty clear at this point in time. I don't think there's too much concern about Bitcoin going away. Now, how the government treats it in time, I think that that's still a little bit to be determined. But I've thought a lot about that. And it was actually that was the main topic for my keynote in Prague.
Right. I wanted to talk about that. I thought that was a really interesting discussion. I thought, well, there's so many little bits of brilliance in your simple story. If I could, just
by all means, please
dig in a little bit more.
Yes.
One is this idea of how the scarcity of Bitcoin, the fact that like you said, okay, cannabis was this commodity that if there's margin there's going to be more production.
Totally.
Right.
Yep.
When Bitcoin goes up in price, you can't produce more, and that just completely inverts the economic model. I always thought of it as like, this is like literally pulling the table cover out from the place settings, just like it's gone. Right. And it just completely changes your view and your economic calculation. Right. So like you saw that immediately, and you made that radical choice to drop my entire life's goal.
Totally.
Everything I worked for to this point, and just go, like, to have the mental flexibility to do that. Like, bravo, dude. Like, that's epic.
Thank you.
That you could pull that off. Number one. But I mean, isn't it hard sometimes to get people to understand this concept? Like this, how important scarcity is? So few people. I mean, I could only imagine, like when you're talking to other people in the cannabis industry, are they grokking that?
Yes and no. And actually, I get into, I don't know, cordial debates from time to time with individuals in the cannabis industry that make comments about how the state of California fucked this whole thing up. Like, oh, they fucked the whole thing up. And you got Humboldt County Growers Alliance, HCGA, is a nonprofit organization trying to support the cannabis community in Humboldt County, and they're petitioning the state. And I talked to a lot of people about essentially everything that they're yelling at the system, you could call it, about. And essentially what everyone wants is to stifle the supply. Oh, shut down the black market, stop large corporations from coming in. And then in some sense, too, the attempt to bring people into compliance, because there was a very large aversion amongst the cannabis community early on to get involved in the regulatory process. I was a little more optimistic and, I don't know, open to the notion that it was going to work out. Maybe there was going to be bumps in the road, but I kind of dove in head first as soon as there was the ability to apply for a permit. And in the beginning, there was a lot of discussion around how they're going to have a 1 acre cap. You're going to be able to, you come into the compliance, and we're going to prevent large entities from coming in and putting in mega grows. And we're going to have a 1 acre cap, and we're going to basically protect you from the supply increasing essentially for a period of time. And that was part of the carrot. There was a carrot stick model, and that was part of the carrot. So we're going to protect you essentially from having, an epic increase in the supply. And so when I'm discussing Bitcoin or cannabis with people in the cannabis community, I it's so easy to see. I can highlight immediately that everything that they're petitioning for or concerned about is essentially an effect or an attempt to stifle the supply. Oh, if they shut down the black market, okay, then if they shut down the black market, then everybody who's producing black market that wants to produce cannabis will just go and get a licensed facility, and then the supply is going to increase relative to the demand, and the margin is going to fall. So you can't protect your margin perpetually. It's like Jeff Booth's work is absolutely so profound, and I think that he's going to go down in the history books as a very important figure in this paradigm shift, because we truly do live in a deflationary world, and
100%.
and the value of everything will fall to the marginal cost of production. So it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you start, Bitcoin podcast, a cannabis farm, you're a content creator, you have a tech company, you produce a pharmaceutical drug, you can only maintain your margin for so long, because if it's a good margin, that's a large incentive for other people to do it. And then what ends up happening in our current world is that incentivizes people to figure out how to build some sort of a regulatory moat around a sector in the marketplace. Like an example that I like to use, and I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe there's 2 companies that have access to the patent to produce insulin. And so insulin has an extremely large margin. If anybody could start a business and produce clean insulin with some sort of testing standard, you would have an influx of entrepreneurs and capital going into that sector of the marketplace. They would increase the supply of insulin significantly. You would have an immense amount of competition, and then the value would drop. And so through the lens of Bitcoin, or even without Bitcoin, essentially what you have to do, and we're not taught this, we're taught to go to school, get a job, work really hard, specialize in something, save your money. But the reality is that you can't protect a margin forever. You're going to lose that margin at some point. Through technological advancement and human ingenuity, we're going to become more efficient, and we're going to drive the prices down on things. So while you have the ability to make a margin, you have to take that surplus from the P&L, and you need to put it into a strong property on your balance sheet. And so in my case, and many other people in the Bitcoin community, that while they were capable of making money, and if they plow into Bitcoin, for me, the loss of income on my P&L has been significantly hedged by the appreciation on my balance sheet. And so you can only make a large margin for so long doing something. Another example I use is, let's say you're in Oklahoma, a tornado comes through town and rips up half of the homes. Well, the 16 construction companies that are in Oklahoma are going to get inundated with work, and they're going to then start. The free market is essentially going to bid the price up. As the price goes up, then that's a beacon of opportunity for other contractors from other areas to move into Oklahoma and start doing construction, which is then going to dilute the margins. It's going to increase the supply of services relative to the demand for that service. And then at some point, that large margin goes away.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
You can run on thin margins if you're able to funnel a portion of those margins into Bitcoin,
Yeah.
and it's growing at a 50% ROI.
Yes.
You're good to go. And that's one of the main reasons why having Bitcoin on the balance sheet makes so much sense for not just companies like MicroStrategy, but for every business owner in America that can grok this issue and manage to save a small portion of their cash flows into Bitcoin. It's going to change and solidify their balance sheet in a massive way.
Totally.
So I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that just more and more people have to realize that. You also talked about the regulators building a moat around big industry.
Yep.
And that wasn't on my list of topics to talk to you about, but I was literally talking about that this morning, that all these letter agencies where there's a revolving door between the big companies and the regulators. And we see this in Bitcoin all the time, right? The SEC has literally built a moat around Wall Street and the banking industry and doing everything they can to prevent the Trojan horse from breaking through the wall,
Yep.
right? Whether that's choke point 2.0, whether it's suing Coinbase, whether it's pushing back on the ETF. I mean, they're just constantly trying to take the little garden hose they have and water down the bonfire, right? Because it's burning and it's ready to, like, I feel like literally if they got out of the way, I don't think Wall Street would have a chance. I mean, I think Bitcoin would just come in and just completely change the landscape rapidly. So yeah, I mean, these guys are just literally the wall between us and a future that we want to build.
Yeah, and I think it's similar with cannabis, where you have these individuals who have been doing something for a long time that's worked really well, and it's getting progressively harder. And as it's getting harder, the first thing that they're clawing at is trying to hold on to the existence that they once had. And the only constant in this world is change, and so you have to embrace change. And another thing that I think is Bitcoin isn't really a threat to anybody. It's a solution for everybody. If these individuals on Wall Street that are benefiting really well from the economic paradigm or the system at large plowed heavy into Bitcoin, they could let go of a inefficient, toxic, old time, and they can embrace this new paradigm. And so I think the resistance to it is a common thing. I don't necessarily know what it is in humans that causes us to resist change so much.
Yeah.
But if they leaned into it heavy, it would solve their problems, And from the perspective of having a debt-based monetary system where the monetary units are being lent into existence as debt against assets, the assets that are collateralizing the debt are defective, as Saylor would say. They're bleeding energy. They're not thermodynamically sound. They're not appreciating at a fast enough rate. So you have a deflationary world and assets that are going down in value that have monetary units being lent into existence against these assets. And if Bitcoin starts to hit the balance sheet of all of the financial institutions, the corporations, the individuals, the central banks, the nation states, everybody, what ends up happening from my perspective is over time, the debasement required to keep the system solvent should decrease because you have a thermodynamically sound asset on the balance sheet that's collateralizing the debt. So in some sense, it's almost like the central banking scheme it was too effective. It worked too well to move economic energy and property and assets from one group of individuals' hands to the central authorities who have the ability to inject the liquidity into the marketplace. And it's bifurcating our society and is causing serious issues. And I think that due to the nature of the existing system and the need to continue to inject liquidity into the marketplace, I think that what we're going to have coming is that once the resistance on Wall Street and with the government is once we kind of blast through that, I think that they're going to realize that Bitcoin is the best collateral in the marketplace. It's the best asset to loan money into. There's an existential crisis within the system where the system it has to continue to debase. If they don't debase fast enough, asset prices fall, the whole thing goes insolvent, and you're going to have an apocalyptic Mad Max scenario. The state and chain and custody of property rights is being held together by this system. So I think Bitcoin has the potential, and at least from my hopeful and optimistic perspective, to give us the smooth transition. You can't just turn fiat off and let the system go bust and then start a new system, because there will be an immense amount of carnage. And so I think that from that perspective, Bitcoin is a monumental solution for the system. And I think that people are figuring this out. If a cannabis farming pleb like me could adopt this perspective, I mean, I think that, tenured CEOs and I don't know, the government officials, these are disciplined people. They're not dumb people. Yeah. They only look dumb. Jamie Dimon and, Jerome Powell, they only look stupid because they're trying to gaslight the shit out of you and make sense of something that doesn't make sense. They're trying to explain to you why a system that's fundamentally broken is going to, I'm going to fix this. No, it's not fixable. You're full of shit. You sound like an idiot.
100%. I had the displeasure now looking back of spending about 25 years in wealth management and dealing directly or being like the middleman between my client, who I really desperately want to do the right thing for, and Wall Street and the massive hypocrisy between what they want you to tell your customer versus what they're doing with the client's money behind the scenes is enormous, right? And so there's this giant amount of energy spent on creating these corrupt or these intricate lies and spin in order to deliver a story that sounds good to the customer, while they're then taking the money and using it for their own means.
Yeah.
And then they're extracting most of the wealth, and they're delivering just enough to the client to make them feel like they're doing great, right?
Yeah.
This when you see this, right, you immediately wake up to this fact that when you're managing money for people, that there's very, very little valuable things out there that you can deliver to a customer. And it's really all about like spending all your time just to don't look over there. don't pay attention to that.
Yeah.
That's garbage. That's a lie. So, when I've heard people like Jamie Dimon and others and Warren Buffett, et cetera, talk about Bitcoin, it's like I immediately see the lie. I immediately see that they're not true in regards to the way they're delivering their message, right? It's not from a heart. It's from what benefits their operation, right?
Yeah.
So it's just it's unfortunate, but what's interesting about this whole idea is that I think that makes it very, very hard for them to transition to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is pure truth.
Totally.
And really, really simple, right?
Yeah.
All their lies and all their BS can be pushed aside, and you can go straight to Bitcoin and outperform almost all of them.
Yep.
That for them to admit that is devastating to the entire industry. We're one of the biggest industries in the United States. Would be deemed irrelevant if they saw that, or if they let their customers see that.
Yeah. And I think that I don't necessarily know that equities become irrelevant per se, but I think that they changed significantly. And I do think that with the FABSB accounting rules changing, I think that we're going to see through just self-preservation, essentially. These corporations are going to need to they have to either hedge themselves against Bitcoin's potential success by having some, or they need to put some on the balance sheet in an attempt to continue to prolong their viability. So I think that
absolutely it becomes Bitcoin plus the economic value of that entity.
Yeah. And right? it's like the great I call it the great demonetization. So all of this monetary energy that's being stored in all of these defective physical or financial instruments is going to flow into Bitcoin. And I think that's going to happen as opposed to people just selling down their real estate or selling all of their equities. I think what's going to happen is that these entities are going to start to put Bitcoin on the balance sheet. So Bitcoin is going to come through the back door in a sense, and it's going to start to back these things like the MicroStrategy playbook. I mean, Saylor hacked the system, man. And what he's doing, though, I think, though, is good for a lot of people call it a speculative attack on the dollar. And I don't necessarily think, and once again, I'm just a cannabis farming pleb. I could be fucking wrong about all of this, but I don't look at it as an attack per se, because he's actually strengthening the value of his business. He's utilizing the cash flows and the value of the stock to borrow, and the system has to continue to inject liquidity in the marketplace. Otherwise we go insolvent and it's Mad Max and it's a major issue. And so I think that it's stabilizing the system. It's supreme collateral. It's almost like the debasement of the currency relative to the gold on reserve over the last 100 years until, 71, where we detached entirely. I feel like Bitcoin is pulling us back to a world where we have the dollar backed by something, and eventually, because the thing that's backing the system can be currency, wherever it is, 30 years, 50 years, 150 years from now, some politician will be like, you know what, we don't need the dollar anymore. You guys can just transact in sats, and we got Lightning, we got layer 3s, whatever. Yeah,
I agree. I've always we hear that we hear government even talking at Bitcoin 24 about revaluing gold, right? A lot of the macro analysts are talking about revaluing gold to fix the balance sheet. I mean, this is what Bitcoin is, right? It's totally a real-time market, a free market, digital gold that's revaluing against the expansion of M2, right? Yeah. And it's just happening in real time. So putting it on the balance sheet as a reserve asset for our government, any government around the world, that it's going to immediately be that the free market version of the $1 trillion platinum coin, right?
Yeah, totally. And as the Bitcoin appreciates, someone in El Salvador is selling pupusas. They're storing that economic surplus in Bitcoin. The Saudis start selling oil for Bitcoin. If the United States government has Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset, as all of the economic activity and efficiency and productivity gains within the marketplace hit the network, then the balance sheet, the asset that the states holds, increases in value. And I've heard smarter people than me, like Jeff Booth and Jack Mallers, talk about how in the long term, Bitcoin could appreciate at a rate and so significantly that it could eventually exceed what the U.S. debt levels are. And so I think about that from, in my experience, or your average, individual, if they have a equity issue, if they are in a position where they don't have enough equity, if they're holding an asset that's appreciating fast enough, then they maintain the equity. Or they could go from a position of having negative equity, like the government has, to having equity if the assets on the balance sheet appreciate fast enough. And something else that you said that it brought up a thought. So when I was selling cars in my early 20s, at that time, the internet had just really kicked off, and Edmunds.com and KBB, these websites are available. So I had very educated customers with iPhones. This is when the iPhones first came out. So they have calculators and they have printouts of the invoice for the car. They come in, they say, hey, I want this Camry, or I want this Toyota Tacoma. And they're like, here's my offer. And I would go to the managers who had been in the business for 10, 20 years, and they were part of the old guard, from the old era, where there wasn't this hyper rate of information spread and the access to information, and the customers weren't as well educated. And I had such a tough time. I used to have to work management harder than I would work the customers. I'm like, look, I'm telling them, I'm like, look, they got the truth. They have the invoice in their fucking hands, and they have an iPhone. You're giving me this stupid Foursquare and telling them just go out there and ask them how much they can afford a month. I'm like, that's not working. I can't just be like, oh, could you pay $900 a month? The guy pulls out his iPhone and goes 900 times 72. He goes, that's $56,000. The truck's only $32,000. What's going on here? So in some sense, there's a little bit of a similar dynamic happening with Wall
Yep.
Street and Bitcoin, or just the financial system at large, where you have this thing that's just this exposing everything. It's like, yeah, it's providing a perspective that's crystal clear. Everything relative to this fixed unit is the value of it is now becoming clear. One of the things that I explain to people when I'm talking about Bitcoin and the economy and just the value of assets, it's, we're all going through the world trying to provide value and get value in exchange and take care of our families and live some sort of a quality life. And we're making economic calculations without a constant, without a fixed unit. We're making these algebraic equations with nothing but variables, because the dollar is a moving unit. So as you're trying to measure the value of something in another variable, you can't really see very clearly what's happening. And most people are kind of suffering from that optical illusion where they think their assets are going up in value. But now you can accurately solve for the value of something in the marketplace because there's a fixed unit. And that just is so revolutionary. And for me, it's been very clarifying and like recalibrating in a lot of ways. It's like, Humboldt County has to come in once a year to the farm and calibrate our scale. Otherwise, the scale may not be right. Like if I put 1 pound of cannabis on that scale, if the scale hasn't been accurately calibrated, then the weight could be off. And so Bitcoin is that calibrating unit.
Yeah.
It's recalibrating how we measure the value of everything in our world.
Dude, you just triggered something for me, right? If you think of like the scale of a weights and units measure, right? And we have dollars on here, right? We throw more dollars on, asset prices go up.
Yep.
When you are not increasing units, but you're increasing the value of each unit, which is what Bitcoin is doing, because it's the only way it can expand is by becoming more expensive, right? It's just the opposite calculation. Now everything's getting cheaper.
Yep.
And or you are forced to deliver that much more value in the goods and services you want,
yes,
or that you can provide to the economy in order to get one of those Bitcoins. So it's like twofold. One, you as a Bitcoin holder are getting a higher purchasing power, but two, it's forcing the individual companies providing services and products to the market to rethink how do they deliver as much value as possible, because I'm not going to give up my Bitcoin for garbage.
Totally. Yeah. And if your economic energy is being preserved in a thermodynamically sound vessel, then your incentive to go ahead and continue to produce value to the marketplace increases. There's almost like this, and it kind of ties back to this nihilistic conundrum that most people are dealing with. They're working harder and they're bleeding out. And most people can't articulate or form a comprehensive understanding of exactly what's happening, but we all know it intuitively. Everyone knows when they're getting fucked. You all know when you're getting fucking screwed, right? You might not be able to know exactly how, but you definitely know you're getting screwed, and that's very decentivizing. And so, I remember growing up and having, very fun, deep philosophical conversations with my family and talking about the future and technological advancement and human ingenuity and how we're going to be moving into this future where there's all this abundance and technology is making everybody's lives better. And that's what should be happening, but it's not happening because of the debasement of the currency. And the people and the entities that are responsible for the debasement of that currency then lie to everybody, and it's causing this mass psychosis and confusion amongst the populace, and then people are more divided, and I as I say, it incentivizes the debasement of the currency is heavily incentivizing scumbaggery in the marketplace, this zero-sum business tactics where you got people in the marketplace that have no problem getting over on one another. And I think that that's predicated upon the fact that there's, essentially And in addition to the debasement of the currency, but all of the assets that people are holding are defective and leaking energy. Like it's, I refer to pre-2009 as the BB world before Bitcoin. We live in the AB world after Bitcoin. It's a fundamentally different reality. The marketplace is different. Our civilization is different. Everything is different now because of this virus in cyberspace, this monetary protocol, the discovery of true scarcity. It's going to fundamentally invert so many things in our world. It's just, it's hard to wrap your mind around. It really is. And I think a lot of people too, though, in the States, especially, we're effectively stealing from the rest of the world by shoving dollars down their throat. It takes no energy to produce dollars, and we're trading dollars for goods and services that take energy to produce. So most of the people in the States, although they are suffering tremendously from a force that they can't really wrap their mind around or see due to the debasement of the currency, in addition to the defective assets, but their lives aren't so bad relative to some of these heavily impoverished areas that have been really heavily exploited. And so I think that's also where, Bitcoin has this multifold, beacon of hope for people, whether you understand that it's the only ethical and monetary instrument or not. Like, you're attracted to the number go up technology. You want to increase your purchasing power, preserve your purchasing power, come up in the game hard AF, as they say on the streets, right? So it's sucking people into it. And as that's happening, that's demonetizing other assets, which are then still going up in nominal terms, which is further monetizing Bitcoin, which is further accelerating this transition. So, yeah. And I like to look at things from an optimistic perspective, and not because I'm deluded, at least I don't believe so. But because the more and more I think about it, the more I think that there is, that force is, it's so powerful that it's sucking us in. And like I said, it's as Bitcoin collateralizes the system, as more and more people save or put it on the balance sheet, or however you want to call it, in Bitcoin, the more stability there is within the Bitcoin. It's like Satoshi, dude, the 2008 bailout is nothing. Satoshi bailed out humanity in the biggest way ever. It's the largest bailout in human history. It's like the final bailout.
Absolutely. Man, that's I'm glad you brought that up, because that's my whole second set of this discussion with you, is to get into spirituality and philosophy around Bitcoin. But before I do, I have a colleague here who's a big fan.
Yeah.
And she wants to say hi. Come on in, Michelle.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Come on a little closer.
How's it going?
Close with the mic.
I'm good. How are you?
Doing very well. Good to see you again, huh?
It's always great to see you.
Yes. You
so too. I've been listening.
Yes.
Oh, wait. We've got Paul here. We got multiple rock stars.
Yes.
I just wanted to say hi.
Yeah. Well, hello.
How are you?
Doing very well. Yeah, we're doing well. The family and I are
cool.
Yeah, we just we're getting ready to go to El Salvador actually in 2 weeks for a Kickstart retreat done by Sovereignty Studios.
That's Michael. Is that Michael down there? Okay, That's super cool. I'm excited I'm glad you're going to that. We'll watch you on X for sure.
Yes. Yeah. And then we're going to, on our way back, we're going to go to Texas, probably spend a week in Austin. My family and I are considering, we're definitely going to relocate at some point, and we're considering Austin. So we're going to go check that out on our way home. Yeah.
Have you considered Florida?
We have, and my wife doesn't seem to be as fond about Florida as I am. I kind of like, there's something really raw and wild, and gators and swamps and guns and
we've
beaches,
got boats and surfing.
Yeah, you know what?
Awesome fishing.
You know what you got to do is you got to bring her to the west coast of Florida, where us cool people hide out with the old people.
Nice.
And we'll convert her to a Florida woman for you.
That sounds good. We'll come visit sometime. time.
There's a lot of California refugees here.
Yeah, you don't want to go to like Miami and Fort Lauderdale. Like it's crowded over there, but if you come to the West Coast, it's amazing. We'll show you guys around.
I was talking to somebody at the pleb party in Nashville. I think Crystal Springs is an area somebody was telling me I should check out on the West Coast there.
Yeah. Paul's probably more familiar with like the different areas up there, but literally anywhere on the West Coast is awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. I have 2 very specific questions for you, and then I'm going to let you guys get back into it. One of them is really selfish. It's totally for me, and the other is for everybody listening.
Yeah.
My question is, you have worked for a long time in a hostile industry.
Yep.
And now kind of coming into Bitcoin, you can see in some ways, it is becoming more and more hostile. We're hoping that changes and maybe the tide is shifting. But how do you stay so positive having been, for years in a hostile regulatory environment?
I would say self-preservation and human greed are the most powerful forces driving people's actions. And I think that the resistance to Bitcoin will be heavily overcome by the need for Bitcoin. So although there's a bunch of individuals that are coming up with bills or regulation or whatever, or attempting to create all of this, I don't know, regulatory impedance within Bitcoin, they essentially, from my perspective, haven't thought about this long enough and hard enough. And I think that in time, for a multitude of reasons, one, it solves their problems. I say this, I don't think Bitcoin is a threat to anybody. I think it's a solution for everybody. And additionally, you have the game theory play out where you essentially have something that you can't stop. If you can't beat them, join them. And so,
sure,
and with cannabis, I watched the county and the state come out with very over-the-top regulations. And I watched the cannabis community essentially, tell them that they could get screwed. Like, we're not getting involved in your regulatory process. We're not going to come into compliance because what you want is too much from us. As an example, they wanted all the farms to have live feed video footage. They wanted all the farms that are out in the middle of the mountains to put in like paved roads, category 4 roads. And the cannabis community is like, yeah, fucking right. We're not going to do this. And these are farms that you can see from Google Maps. You can drive SUVs right up to the farm. You can shut these people down very, very, very easily. And instead of coming down heavy-handed, the state of California and the counties within California, they immediately went back to the drawing board. They extended deadlines and they dropped a bunch of the regulatory friction, and they made it much more attractive for the community to get involved because they need the tax dollars. As the government is debasing the currency, they're creating the same existential crisis for themselves as they are for the marketplace. Their cost of operating is going up at a faster rate than their ability to increase their revenue. So if the government's cost of operating is going up at 10%, but they can only increase their revenue by 10%, they have a target that's moving further away from them. And the solution to that is a monetary instrument that appreciates when other entities or other individuals or entities or nations upload their economic energy into that network. So, yeah, and I went through a little bit of a period of time, and it hit me really, really hard after I came back from Pacific Bitcoin last year. So I had 100% Bitcoin allocation, hardcore Bitcoin maximalist. I had been running around for the last couple of years now in Humboldt County, talking about Bitcoin nonstop, yelling at the same 20 fucking people all day long about how big of a deal this is. And come time for Pacific Bitcoin, I went to my wife and I'm like, look, I got to go to this conference. Like, I need to meet some other Bitcoiners. Like, I'm kind of going crazy. Like, I need to meet some people.
Yeah.
And I was talking with Matt Cratter, and he said something that really hit me hard. He's like, Bitcoin's the first money humanity's ever had. We had a commodity money. We've had, currencies issued by nation states. And thinking about that, it really God, I thought about it long and hard. And I got home maybe a week later. I was sitting in the sauna and I'm thinking about the banking bloodlines. And I'm thinking, like, oh my gosh. And I just got hit with this tsunami of fear. Like, I could be in a position of jeopardy. I'm listening, I got some of Eric Kayson's rants rattling around in my head about how we're going to live in camps. And I'm just like, I don't know if that's the case. Right. And like, what do I do? And so Matt Cratter had told me, we were chatting. It was a 2-day event, and I bought a VIP ticket because I wanted to increase my exposure to a lot of these people that are like some of my best friends that I have one-sided relationships with. They don't know I exist, but they have a tremendous impact on me, right?
Well, they do now.
They do now, yeah. And so we're talking. I'm talking to Cratter, and I'm talking to a couple TradFi guys that our strategy shareholders. They were, talking about how they were on some of the Zoom calls where Saylor is, essentially orange pilling the FabSpeed board. And I was telling them my story with cannabis and how, I sold my farm and I'm doing consulting services and I live in a rental and like, I was planning on buying a house and I pivoted that strategy. I'm going to keep all my money in Bitcoin and whatever. And so anyways, I'm telling him my story. The next day he came to me and pulled me aside and was like, look, your story is really impactful and the way that you tell it is unique. And I think people need to hear it. Like, you should be making content. And, people have been telling me that for a long time. I couldn't wrap my mind around that for the life of me. I've lived a very quiet life. The whole game really is to not draw attention to yourself. Although I have been compliant in the state of California, there's a little bit of a dynamic within cannabis where if you get caught producing cannabis, at least pre-licensure, under the 215 model, I had a 501c3, a bunch of qualified patient members. I'm paying taxes. I got an accountant. I got a corporate attorney. I got a criminal defense attorney. Like I'm not a big risk taker for somebody who's producing a federally illegal product. Lost my train of thought. Yeah. So anyways, I just, I'm rather introverted and kind of lived this quiet life. So I just couldn't, I just like, nobody gives a fuck what I have to say. Like, I don't, how am I going to do that? And I'm really busy and I don't know how to edit videos. And there's all of these epic educators and content creators and personalities within the space supporting the network. And like, anyways, his comment to me, really hit hard. And so I really thought about it really long and hard. I probably spent a month after coming back from Pacific Bitcoin. And I'm thinking about Jason Lowry's work. I'm thinking about what's are the ETFs going to get approved? Like, is this thing a threat? How does the system work? And like, it was kind of like when I owned my farm, I had this huge incentive to understand how the economy worked and the money system worked and how the property of my value the value of my property was being affected by that. It was a similar thing where now I had this huge incentive to figure out, like, am I in a position of jeopardy? Like, it's like playing chess. Like, how could this possibly play out in negative ways? And the more and more I thought about it through reason and logic, the more and more that I started to develop and adopt the optimistic perspective. And I do truly see it as a solution. I think that we might run into some sticking points. I think that you might have some Elizabeth Warrens and some individuals that are like going to say a bunch of things that are bad for Bitcoin. And maybe there's like temporary measures that are slow the rate of adoption and demonetization and the movement into the new world. But as far as I can tell, it's absolutely inevitable. And whether this takes 10 years or 100 years or 1,000 years, we live in the most important, special time in all of known history. And I think about all of the human ancestors that came before us. If I went to one of my ancestors, my great grandfather, and I was like, look, I got this inviolable, undebasable, unconfiscatable, unfuckwithable monetary instrument, and I'm scared, he'd fucking slap me. He would be like, you're ridiculous. People since the beginning of time have been getting killed and had their stuff taken from you and from us. And you're going to tell me you have something that can't be taken from you and you're scared? Like, that's crazy, right? And so,
It's true.
and I do have a little bit of an understanding how the corporate world works due to the fact that I had to found and fund and start a corporation in order to get licensed by the state of California. So I do understand a little bit of the things, maybe more so than your average American does, and at least how corporate America works and how Wall Street works. And just from simple, appreciation rates and equity, from an equity perspective, the assets collateralizing the debt are defective. They're leaking energy. Mm-hmm. So if the system has to continue to debase to keep the system solvent, if you can put an asset on the balance sheet or collateralize with the debt with an asset that's not bleeding energy, then the debasement required to keep the system solvent has to decrease. And so in some sense, I don't think Bitcoin's a threat to the dollar. I think it's a solution for the dollar. I think Bitcoin is both fixing the dollar at the same time that it's replacing the dollar because of its thermodynamic properties, because it's supreme collateral. And we live in a time where the government has to come up with more ways to inject liquidity into the marketplace to keep the system solvent, mm-hmm. to prop asset prices up. Bitcoin is the best vector to do so. That, and from the perspective of 6102, I've thought a lot about this, and case and talking about camps and whatever. And I'm like, okay, so if they can't steal the Bitcoin, right? How do they get the Bitcoin? Well, if they lend money into existence as debt against Bitcoin, then Bitcoin is going to hit the balance sheet of central banks. And also, you could say, well, fuck those guys. They're a bunch of shitbags. They've caused all these problems for our civilization. And whether there's nefarious intent or not, I don't like to focus on that because I don't think it's a productive thought thread. I think that by borrowing against Bitcoin, like Saylor is doing, he's doing it indirectly. He's borrowing against his shares that are backed by Bitcoin. I don't think that that's a speculative attack on the dollar. I think that that's giving up a portion of your inviolable, non-debasable property in order to stabilize the system. And I look at that as a act of actually helping to bring stabilization, solvency, sanity, whatever into the system. And it's like being a quintillionaire, but it's ethical. Because if you're borrowing against your real estate and you're buying more real estate, you're contributing to homelessness. If you're hoarding houses, where you have abundance in money, you create scarcity in everything else. Where you have scarcity in money, you create abundance in everything else. And in this case, the money is invisible, and the money incentivizes a more efficient production of electricity, energy, right? And so if you're hoarding this invisible monetary instrument, you're pulling that economic energy out of the network, strengthening. Well, you're not taking it out of the network. You're taking the units out of the network and you're hoarding them, strengthening the value in the marketplace of the existing units. So it's ethical in all of its ways. And so, I mean, that's the long and short of it, but that's, and I also do think from a more spiritual and metaphysical perspective, I think we live in a vibrational universe, and I believe that we're all affecting and creating our own reality. And I think that our vibratory state is being mirrored to us in the world around us. And so I think that it's prudent for us to figure out how to develop a perspective of positivity, gratitude, and love and optimism. And as a result, and if you meet the world with that vibratory state, the world is going to reflect that back to you. And so I love that. One of the things that's so beautiful about Bitcoin is instead of hopium, it's fucking math. It's like, yo, it's true. I'm positive and I'm optimistic and I believe in love and abundance and freedom and fairness and all these things. And actually, I can really embody that vibratory state, that state of being, that feeling because of this monetary protocol predicated on physics and math. And so it's not delusional, and pre-Bitcoin, I used to really struggle with like trying to tap into a truly optimistic, positive mindset constantly. I would get sucked into this negativity or this like, depression in some ways where it's like, oh gosh, I used to think that like I would have rather lived like a couple hundred years ago. Like, oh, that was a better time to live. Like, this is a fucking mess. How are we going to deal with all of this? And now, because of my understanding or beliefs about Bitcoin, I feel like I live in the best time in all of human history. And so,
Yeah.
I think that, I mean, that's a long-winded answer there, but that's essentially all of it in a
I love it.
nutshell. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love it. And I know that Paul is going to talk to you more about like psychedelics and some of the vibrational stuff.
Yeah.
So I'll let you guys get into that.
Cool.
One thing I think that you and I have in common is that we have, maybe been in Bitcoin longer, but are like more recently sharing our
Yeah.
stories. I went public, I think, like kind of right before you did. And I've been like just constantly trying to encourage people to also be more vocal about what they feel, like just bring common sense back by being willing to say what you think, right? So, what is your advice, just like for new people who are maybe afraid to speak up? I assume you would encourage them to do that. What's your one piece of advice for those folks?
I Now that I'm getting older, I'm a little
Mm-hmm.
more patient, and I'm better at meeting people where they are. I find that if I try to force a perspective or an opinion or an idea upon somebody, the more I push it, the more resistance I run into. And so
Yeah.
I think one of the and I've thought very deeply about this. Like, what am I doing? What's the point of all of this? Like, who gives a fuck what I have to say? What's my value contribution? What can I
Right.
add? And all I can really share is my experience and how this has fundamentally transformed my life. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that in especially in my social sphere, pre making friends with all of these Bitcoiners, the thing
Yeah.
that I have done that's been the most impactful is just be really fucking happy about what's happening. People are like,
Mm-hmm.
struggling. Oh, and the cannabis is a problem, and the regulators are fucking this up, and the cost of everything is going up, and the market's a mess. And like, I see some of my buddies on Instagram posting, things. It's like, as Jeff Booth would say, they're just yelling at clown world. And I don't think that
Yeah.
helps anything. And so when I have conversations with people who are suffering from those kinds of things, if I
Mm-hmm.
express to them that like those things don't bother me and this is why, I think that's the most impactful. And I do think that over time, as some of the regulatory pushback, some of the FUD, dwindles down, people will be a little bit less
Right.
concerned. I think that there's people that, don't have sufficient self-custody schemas set up, that aren't, they're concerned about a $5 wrench attack. Like, there's a lot of logical reasons why people want to be anonymous. I was
Sure.
just recently explained, like, in Greece, I know a couple people who are hardcore Bitcoiners that live in Greece. And apparently the government, like, if you're public about your Bitcoin position in Greece, they will come down hard on you. You'll get taxed. You'll run into
Yeah.
issues. So I think, I've kind of just softened my my pushback against, like, people.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody's ready. Like,
Yeah, that's true.
everybody's like coming into a place of being comfortable with where they are and what they have and what they believe, all in different rates. And
Right.
one of the things too that I'll leave this thought with this, like, there's a common saying amongst the Bitcoin community, and especially within Bitcoin content creators, that really I struggle with. And it's this idea that you don't have enough Bitcoin. I
Yeah.
disagree with that entirely. As long as Bitcoin is here and it exists and there's 21 million forever, it's going to appreciate at a
Right.
faster rate on average over time than everything else in the marketplace. And Bitcoin is here for you when you're fucking ready for it. And so, like, yeah, you
I
might
agree.
miss out on some of the upside, but like, it's like we're spiraling upwards forever. And so, like, as soon as
Yeah.
people are ready for Bitcoin, and as soon as they're ready to come out and share their Bitcoin stories, they will. And in some sense, I think, like, Bitcoin doesn't need us. We need Bitcoin. It's not going
Right.
anywhere. Like, it's,
It's true.
and so,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, it's true. And I think it's really important to remember, like, you're not too late. Even if this is the first podcast you're ever listening to, if you're just looking or considering to buy Bitcoin now, it's not too late. It's never too late. Like you
totally.
said, Bitcoin is here for us.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, it's really great to get a chance to chat with you. I'm going to hand the mic back over to our esteemed Paul over here
Yes.
and let you guys rip on about some wild stuff. But keep up the great work. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you.
I'm so glad to have met you and your amazing family. And let us know if you want to come visit Florida. We are here and we would love to host you guys.
Definitely. We will sometime for sure. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Great to talk to you.
You too.
Cool. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, guys.
All right. So for those of you who have hung with us this far, if you like what you've seen, please subscribe. Please share this video. Give us a like. And as many people as you can spread this video to is going to help all of us orange pill more people, bring them to the Bitcoin community. So we hope you'll join this journey with us. So Eric, I want to jump into some more spiritual, philosophical components to Bitcoin. And I saw in a previous podcast I was watching you bring up Bashar's name.
Yep.
And I love Bashar. He's the man. And so I wanted to find out from you kind of how you frame Bitcoin in a spiritual context, or how you see Bitcoin impacting spirituality at large.
Gosh, that's a really expansive question. In some,
I guess start with the easy stuff.
Yeah. Right? And so in some sense, kind of going back to like the idea of you have this constant in the marketplace now. So you can see things accurately. You can see the rate of deflation that's actually taking place in the world. In some sense, it's kind of like we're living in this reality where everything is in flux. Everything is moving. There's this constant vibratory state up and down, just this movement. It's almost like being in the ocean and you're just like moving through the waves. And Bitcoin is this solid ground that you can, or this concrete or non-moving place that you can stand on or tether yourself to. And it gives you a much larger and more accurate perspective. And then also from the place of the law of attraction, it's really hard at times, because I do believe that we live in a vibrationally based universe. Tesla famously said, you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in energy, vibration, and frequency. And so everything has a vibratory frequency. It's exuding a vibratory frequency or vibration. And if you have a thought, that thought elicits a feeling, and that feeling and that thought both have a vibration associated with them. And what you put out is what you get back. And so what I've experienced with Bitcoin is Bitcoin has given me, it's like the biggest hack ever to be able to maintain and obtain a higher vibratory state. It's logic and it's reason. It's for all of time, people have been like looking for something outside of this reality to explain this reality, something to look to, to hold on to an idea of hope or a better existence. And, we believe you got all these different stories with religion and some, sky daddy or these entities in the beyond, the creator and all of that. And I do think that I do believe in some sort of a creator force, and that in some sense we live in a simulation created by ourselves. I think that we're eternal beings that are living in a limitless, expansive realm that have chosen to come to this limited reality to experience that contrast. And right. So what you put out is what you get back. And believing in some of these more abstract metaphysical woo-woo concepts or ideologies can be a little challenging. And at times when you get rocked by the trials and tribulations in life, it's easy to oscillate out of that trust and that knowing that everything is working out for you. It's not, things aren't happening to you, they're happening for you. Everything that happens to you, you can adopt a perspective that is for your highest. And so I just think that Bitcoin is such a hack for being able to obtain and maintain like a higher, more positive vibratory state. Because
Yeah.
all you have to believe in is just math, logic, truth, love, abundance, fairness, an immutable ledger. And from that place, that solid ground that you can tether yourself and anchor yourself to, it's like vibrationally, like you continue to spiral upwards. It's like elevating people's consciousness. And where I
Yeah.
think
Absolutely.
there's like a mass consciousness that's being elevated, the collective consciousness is being elevated. I think that you create higher highs and higher lows as we're like ascending into a higher state of being, a more
Hmm.
blissful state of being. And in this specific case with Bitcoin, it's just predicated on a technology, or really more a discovery, a protocol stack that actually allows that to happen. So instead of like, holding on to this faith, it's actually now tangible. It's a tangible
Right.
thing. And so, yeah, and I do think, kind of like what Michelle asked. I was listening to a Bashar interview, and the interviewer, he was talking about frequency and creating your own reality and whatever. And the interviewer was like, this is also exciting, and isn't this, people are figuring this out, and like people are ascending into a higher state of consciousness, and that's good for everybody. And Bashar said, only for those who are ready. Some people are falling into a lower, more dense state of consciousness and being. And you can see that divide taking place in our world, where it's both the best of times and it's also the worst of times. Like there's almost like this reality split taking place. And I'll go ahead and say this because this is what Bashar said, and it makes some sense to me. And I'm still grappling with how profound the concept is. He essentially said that your vibration, what you get out is what you put back. Your vibratory state is
Hmm.
going to pull a momentary like a moment in time out of the quantum field. And we're going to put all those moments in time, and every time you're moving through time space reality, your vibratory state is changing. And as your vibratory state changes, what you're experiencing in that moment is getting pulled out of the quantum field, and you're stacking these experiences kind of like you would stack images on a film reel, and it's creating the linear perception of time. And some people are creating a different reality for themselves than you're creating for yourself. And you can kind of see that definitely within Bitcoin. There are people that are traveling the world, networking, building, developing, and living a completely different reality than people who are, stuck in clown world, yelling at clown world, stuck in the political divide. And he says that he used the metaphor, there's like glass walls that protect you from other people's vibratory state and what they're manifesting and creating for themselves versus what you're creating and manifesting for yourself. And so your vibration and your trajectory, I guess you could say, is sending you towards a particular future. And you can see what other people are manifesting for themselves, but they're manifesting what they're vibrational match to, and you're manifesting what your vibrational match to. And if that vibration over time changes so dramatically, they'll end up in their own completely independent, fractalized reality, and you'll end up in your own reality. And he says that dynamic is actually what causes the Mandela effect, where you can time jump, or what's the perception of time jumping, where some people have a different memory of something happening than other people because the collective consciousness changed the direction of the collective. And so, kind of back to what Michelle asked about, how do I maintain positivity? That's part of it. Like, and this is super out there, and maybe this isn't how reality works, but I do think that in some sense it makes a lot of sense that like somebody could, if we're all, and Jeff Booth even said this on at his keynote in Madeira. He goes, "We're all literally creating our own realities, and through the lens of quantum physics, we are at the very least affecting the outcome. We're causing the wave to collapse into a particle by sheer observation, right?" And so
Right.
in that period of time, where after I went to Pacific Bitcoin, I spent like a month really thinking long and hard about like, am I in a position of jeopardy? Like, are we going to have a 6102? Are we going to end up in some sort of gnarly tyrannical future? And I kind of came to the conclusion, as wacky as this may sound, like that's not the reality I'm going to create for myself. No fucking way. Like, I'm going to stay in a place through logic and reason, where I'm optimistic and positive about what is coming out of the quantum field, or coming into from the future, or like what future we're going into. And so whether it's through, taking action that helps to steer in the most infinitesimal way, push our civilization in a particular direction, or exuding that vibration and pulling that future out of the quantum field, I don't know if there's necessarily even a difference. And so that's kind of one of the things that I want to do a little bit, is just help continue to shed light on whether it's just, and even if it's just a potential outcome. Maybe it's not even probable. I don't know. Like, I just want to help continue to put energy into a positive outcome, a positive timeline where, hey, this works out in our highest, where the government does adopt a Bitcoin treasury reserve strategy, and it does solve the debt, and like they roll out the fucking orange carpet for us because we have Bitcoin and it's a big deal, and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that's I think you're getting to the same point that I came to with Bitcoin, is that once you grok the protocol, the rationality, the math, the logic, and the truth in that protocol builds up a rational confidence in you that you are going to become wealthy. You are going to become abundant. You are going to be able to pursue these visions of your future that previously in the fiat world you could not fathom getting there. So I think this is why Bitcoin is this hack, right? It gives you that confidence so that you can vibrate that vision.
And it creates a manifestation feedback loop.
Yes. Yeah. Right. It's no longer like it's no longer a hope.
Totally.
It's no longer I wish I could. It's I am. Right? I am going to be. It's only a matter of time before I get there.
And I think of it as we are, changes it, right? All of us.
100%. 100%. And when you become that, as opposed to I want to be, you become I am.
Yes.
We are. Boom. Stuff just starts hitting you, like it starts coming, and you start spiraling up. And so it's like, I mean, it's just mind blowing to me that this protocol is delivering that to humanity at this point in time, when you're describe this divide.
Yes.
When you see people falling into the abyss of nihilism and depression and fear, and others going, love, gratitude, build the future. It's going to be amazing. And then I correlate that to the fourth turning, the earliest green shoots. The Bitcoin community is the earliest green shoots. In the dying, decaying winter of the fourth turning.
Yes.
So I'm really excited about that. And I see so many Bitcoiners start from the perspective, I'm going to get rich, number go up, and then figure this out.
Totally.
That it's really excites me about the future.
Yeah. And then, another thing that I think about a bit, it's like Satoshi merged the physical world with the metaphysical world. Now you have this thing that's informational, that's finite. It's like Saylor says, he discovered matter in cyberspace. And like that is what's the difference between cyberspace and just the ethereal realm? As far as I'm concerned, it's all invisible information that's just moving around, and it's almost like we've quite literally merged those two worlds.
Right.
And I think I don't know how that's affecting our conscious state of being, but it clearly is.
So, you mentioned fractals, right? And I mean, I see fractals everywhere in the world, right? Everything is a fractal of the greater consciousness in my mind. And you can see fractals even in the chart of Bitcoin, because humans are interacting with Bitcoin and it's painting these fractals up on the bar chart, right? So You see fractals all through nature, and I think fractals are, in essence, part of natural law. So to me, and I've just started to kind of think about this idea, so I'm excited to throw it out to you and get your feedback, right? I'm starting to visualize Bitcoin as a fractal of consciousness or consciousness money. So if I think of consciousness as everything that has been, everything that is, and everything that will be, as like a chain that never ends of all potential possibilities or all potential human transactions. Right?
Yes.
Living in consciousness. And we as humans with our antenna are connecting, downloading, sending, receiving, moving these transactions in consciousness.
Yes.
The private public key pair and the Bitcoin blockchain is a fractal of that system. And that we're using our private keys to send, receive, inspect, review, see what transactions have taken place in the future, or in the past, in the here and now. Whatever transactions we're deliberately doing in the future are then coming into the here and now. It to me, it's just mapping. It's like Satoshi grabbed consciousness, mapped it to money, created a fractal version of it, and imported it into money. And I think this might be why we're experiencing this sort of enlightenment through this damn protocol of truth.
Yeah, that is, I like that. And it made me think of one thing that Bashar says is one of his five laws, and everything is here and now. Everything that ever was, ever will be is all here and now. And it's that's the quantum physics perspective. And another fascinating thing, I think that everything is conscious. I think that, everything is energy, everything is vibration, and everything is conscious. And now we have the ability to, through the ethereal realm, you could say, but it's through cyberspace, send that energy in a way that we've never been able to before. And I think that connection, there's some sort of correlation there between your ability to upload your life force into this ethereal realm and send it to somebody else, and in such a profound way. It's just it's so wild and such a big
radical.
deal. It's like, and one of a podcast, Portal Orange, Breedlove, Valis, Kaysen, American Hodl, and Sailor were talking, and they were just talking about, how Satoshi merged all of these different things together to create the protocol. And Breedlove referred to it. He's like, yeah, it's humanity's masterpiece. Like, this is humanity's masterpiece. This is the thing that's taking us into the new age. This is it's a fundamentally different reality. So I think about simulation theory and the idea essentially that at some point it's logical to think that we'll be able to create a simulated reality that's so good it's indistinguishable from base reality. If you look at the technological advancement within video games over the last 20 years, if you fast forward the clock, whether it's 200 or 2,000 or 2 million, 2 billion, at some point, it's logical to think that we'll be able to create a simulation that's indistinguishable from base reality. If that's the case, then it's actually not likely, it's improbable that we live in base reality. So if we live in a simulation, in some sense, it's almost like, and I think, Kaysen said Bitcoin is messianic. Like, Satoshi could be the Messiah. Like, did the returning of Christ happen in 2009 and most people are unaware of it? Did the creator fundamentally type a few new lines of code and upgrade the simulation? I think the BB world, the game fundamentally didn't work. We had defective assets. We were limited to the physicality of property. The incentive was to violence. You have something that I want. I say, give me some of that. You say, no, thank you. I say, hey, I want half. You're like, no, I don't want to give you any. I kill you. I get all of it. Yep. Now with Bitcoin, that's completely changed. Dematerialized property. Now the incentive is to peace. It's like, from my perspective, if we live in a simulation, it's like an update hit the simulation. It's like, oh, let's download update 2.674 or whatever. Nope, we're in a new time. The simulation, the computer program is running a new protocol, and it changes the fabric of our reality.
Yeah. Man, I mean, property literally just got uploaded into consciousness.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty wild.
You can carry you can carry property around in your head. You know, it's the double spin problem. Everything that was informational pre-Bitcoin, I tell you 100,000 years ago, hey, go down to the river, there's some fish there. You have a copy of that information, I have a copy of that information. I send you a JPEG, an email, or whatever. You maintain a copy, I got a copy. You know, before Bitcoin, there was nothing informational that I could. There wasn't a informational bearer instrument. I couldn't give you some piece of information without maintaining a copy of it.
Yep, that's for sure. Yeah, man, this is definitely, we're getting to a point where I think we might hit a critical mass where I feel like we have people waking up from lots of different spokes on the wheel.
Yeah.
Right? Whether that's through the food that they're eating and they're realizing they're being poisoned, whether that's from pharmaceuticals and COVID, whether that's from the corruption in finance, whether it's from loss of freedom of speech, censorship, all these different things that are waking people up and turning them are causing them to second guess the system. And then they're digging in and they're finding at the core of all these systems is money. And then they're learning about the corruption of money. And then from there, they hopefully get into the Bitcoin rabbit hole, which creates this spiral of consciousness
upwards,
that raises them, elevates them upward.
Yeah.
And now they're motivated to fix the entire system without that nihilistic approach of just destroying it and knocking it down. If that happens, this would be the first time in human history where we transition without mass destruction.
Totally
That's
agree.
What I'm hopeful for. That's what I'm hopeful for.
I totally agree. And yeah, it's so money is, we use money to transfer effectively to just move energy back and forth between each other. And if we're eternal, infinite beings, we would then want to experience limitation. We would want to experience the contrast. You can't have sweet without bitter. You can't have light without dark. And so in some sense, the discovery of Bitcoin is like the Holy Grail. It is the thing that is a catalyst to almost sending you down. It's almost the catalyst to send you down the spiritual path to realize that, like, wait a second. I think we are coming from this infinite consciousness fractalized in an attempt to experience contrast and experience itself. And the way Bitcoin affects your ability to grapple with that potential is very profound.
I agree. So this whole idea of yin and yang, right? Dark and light.
Yeah.
It's almost like you cannot appreciate the beauty and truth of Bitcoin until you've experienced the lies and the corruption.
Absolutely. And that's why I personally believe we live in the best time ever. I think to myself, like, wait a second. I got to my mid 30s or early 30s, and I spent, 15 years of my life thinking, like, gosh, like this is a terrible time to be alive in a lot of ways. Like, this is terrible. And there, it's so beautiful, and I feel so grateful. Like, I look at my daughter and I think to myself, like, she doesn't have the contrast that I have of the BB world. Like, I know firsthand how fucked things were, and now I'm getting to experience the new world. I say it when I make rants walking around in the greenhouse. We live in a new fucking world. It is a fundamentally different reality. The discovery of Bitcoin changes everything. It changes everything. It's entirely different. And then, so getting to experience that contrast is something I'm very grateful for.
Important. My kids are obviously older than yours, so I've seen them grow up and be aware of all the issues in the world and the troubles in the world, and sort of like I see sort of some of the fear emerging.
Yeah.
And I've used what I've learned in Bitcoin. I've used what I've learned about the fourth turning to educate them that their future is so bright,
Mm-hmm.
that they're literally living on the cusp, and the future that's going to emerge, it's like, yeah, we're going to go through some hard times, but that future that's going to emerge is going to be so beautiful and so perfect compared to what you're witnessing now.
Yeah.
And it's given them and inspired them, hopefully, to have the hope to just sort of isolate themselves from that garbage, isolate themselves from that fear and that drama, and just focus on the beautiful future that they're going to have in front of them. And I think Bitcoin gives that to so many people. And that's part of the reason why I think so many of us are inspired to share this message.
Yeah.
Because if it was just about money, if it was just about, and no, I'm not trying to throw shade on anybody that comes from for number go up, because I
Yeah.
think a lot of us start there, but eventually it's not about the money. Eventually it changes to this like vision and hope for the future, and that's when you get this like feeling like, I have to share this. I have to share
Yeah.
this with everybody. I have to bring everybody I know into the system, and that's when you become the preacher or the water cooler guy or the person that just never
Mm-hmm.
stops talking about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And because you want to help people, you want
Totally.
to orange pill people, because you feel like you're delivering them to this promised land. Like, just like, come with me, let's go. This is going to be incredible. You're going to love it.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, it's it's transmuting dark into light. And the thing too that's so profound is the thing inside of us, because we all have darkness in us. When people talk about being light workers in the spiritual community, it was like, and you're also a dark worker. Let's get real. Like, you're not only light, like we all have darkness in us. And Bitcoin and the darkness within us, and the thing that drives us to, it's the self-preservation. I don't know. Human greed fundamentally is what makes Bitcoin work. It's like inverted human greed for something that's good for everybody. It's merged it's merged the what's best for the individual for what's best for the collective for the first time in human history. And that's just
absolutely
so special, so profound. Yeah. And I think it's okay that people are attracted to the number go up thing. That's also what makes it work. That's why my node, I'm not going to download a version of Bitcoin with 42 million coins, because I'm selfish, and I'll admit that. I'm not going to dilute myself, right? I don't want to dilute myself. If I had a bunch of mining rigs running, I'm not going to try to mine a false block and steal somebody's Bitcoin, because I don't know what in today's market, what's it, $200,000 worth of electricity? I don't know. It's a lot of money in electricity. I'm not going to spend that money in electricity to attempt to do something that's dishonest when it takes, I don't know, a fraction of a cent's worth of electricity to protect the network against that false block. It's trillions of times more energy to attempt to attack the network than it is to protect the network. The separation between the miners and the nodes is a very beautiful thing. And so even if you are a scumbag and you want to try to get over on people, you get paid the most to do the right thing. And that's the inversion in the incentive structure. If you want to get the most, and this is also kind of going back to what Michelle asked me. So I think I almost sympathize with the banking bloodlines. The incentive was to violence, and the game was essentially to figure out how to protect your stuff from being stolen from you and from people killing you. So essentially, if the incentive was to violence, then the game, an element of the game created a dynamic in which the people who run the world are the best at killing and stealing. And so, one of the great Rothschilds solved an issue, a problem. Like, we had a technological shortcoming of gold. He figured out, hey, I'm going to warehouse this gold and I'm going to issue some certificates. And as a result, that solved a major problem in the marketplace, and they became very wealthy. And so,
well, that's it. You made me think of something right here now. All these wealthy families have gotten to points in history where they become the target.
Yeah.
Right. Where the masses want to rise up and redistribute their wealth.
Totally.
And so a defense mechanism to that is to make them fight with each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. Self-preservation.
Right. So I hadn't really thought of it before, but it makes total sense. Is that becomes the framework by which you try to bypass these fourth turnings and retain your wealth, is get them to fight with each other so that they don't come after you.
And they're also suffering from the fact that they're storing their wealth in defective assets. So in order to protect their wealth, they have to continue to steal. And the path of least resistance now, because of the discovery and existence of Bitcoin, is to stack sats. And if and the way I say this all the time, if I can figure this out, banking bloodlines are going to figure this out. And it's also logical to think that there's going to be attacks on the network. There's going to be a psyop. There's going to be an attempt to try to shake people out and capture some of this. And so in some sense, you know, like I'm very optimistic, but I'm also not naive. You know, like actually Michelle posted something, since she's here and we were just chatting. She posted something recently that was like, this is a war. And I respectfully agree and disagree in some sense. And I don't know, this was like maybe 6 months ago. And there was, you know, she's obviously talking about the, you know, Bitcoin versus the existing system. And maybe I took it out of context. I don't know. I saw it while I was just scanning through, so I could be entirely wrong. But what I thought she was saying catalyzed a thought. And although there has been a war, you could say, between good and evil for all of time, and there's likely to be one for all of time, I feel like in a lot of ways, the war has been won. And it's logical to think, though, since most people still on the battlefield are unaware of the fact that the war is over, there's residual fighting taking place. And now that you have this like holy grail or this new, I don't know, this like, just this powerful network, this thing, like that's still logical to think that there are people who are going to attempt to do things in a nefarious way to get more than what it is right. So although I think things are fundamentally changed, and that change has it's going to take a long time for it to take root, I also am not naive. Like I have to insulate myself from blowback or from potential issues as a result of the lingering and residual fighting that's taking place over essentially the state and chain and custody of property, who owns what. And yeah, the need to protect yourself against people taking your stuff is so great. And it's even like, as a pleb, I have less of an existential crisis than the world's wealthiest people do, because they have all this shit to protect. Like they need Bitcoin almost more than I do. And that's another inverse abstract thought. Like, wait a second, that's crazy. Like the poor people who are struggling really need Bitcoin more than the wealthy people. Yeah, sure, from one perspective, but there's the duality in life. And from another perspective, the people who have a bunch of stuff that everybody wants to redistribute from them, they need to figure out how to get some sats. And I also think, like, dude, banking bloodlines and governments, they're going to be buying tons of coins, whether it doesn't matter whether it's 60K a coin or it's 6 million a coin or 60 million a coin. They're going to get a lot of coinage, and the purchasing power is what matters. It doesn't really matter what percentage of the network you have or how many coins you have. Like I'm going through this internal torturous battle with myself right now as I'm thinking about relocating and moving out of Northern California. And in order for me to do so, I have a few logical paths that I can take. I can sit here and hunker down, and I can figure out how to monetize my efforts in a different way than I have been for the last 15 years. Because for the last 15 years, all of my income has come directly from producing and selling cannabis lawfully. By the way, I had somebody make a comment earlier, so I have to a couple of days ago. So I got lawful. I'm not a huge risk taker. I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to do a bunch of illegal shit and then come out as a public Bitcoiner. But anyways, so I have intention on creating a new chapter in my life, as I put it. And I can go about this a few different ways. I could either start figuring out how I'm going to make money in a new form or a new capacity now and self-fund and use that surplus or that economic, energy or those earnings to move. Or I could sell some Bitcoin and move. And I'm very very stuck at times. Half the time I'm like, wait a second, I have so much Bitcoin. And at 45% or 50% annual growth rate, my appreciation should be this much, and this is the purchasing power that I'm going to get, right? And so in some sense, I get the most if I don't do anything. If I just maintain and I just live in my little bubble, and I don't take any massive action of any sort, and I just hold on to that Bitcoin with dear life, as opposed to selling some of that Bitcoin and accessing that energy so that I can make a transition, change, take the, move, whatever. And the thing that I keep coming back to, although it's a battle, man, I'll tell you, it's a fucking battle. The thing that I keep coming back to is I may not be able to, so if I sell some Bitcoin and it's 60K a coin, and I can't buy more Bitcoin for 2 years, and it's $1 million a coin 2 years from now, let's say, and I'll never be able to get the same amount of Bitcoin back, I can always get the purchasing power back. I can always get the purchasing power back, and I can always re-enter into that network with my surplus and continue to spiral upwards. And so I've thought long and hard about it, but it's still like it's such a battle. And what I'm essentially struggling with within myself is oscillating between having a mindset of trust, love, and abundance versus fear and scarcity and whatever, right? And it's that So
I'll give you a story that relates to that, and then I'm cognizant of your time, so maybe we'll wrap up here. But we just bought a family farm not too long ago.
Yep.
Because we love the outdoors, we love animals, and we want to spread that. But it was also a little bit driven by fear, because it's like, oh man, like what's happening to the food supply? What's happening to the world? Like, it'd be nice to have some acreage, be able to live off the land, and be a little bit more like self-sovereign in all aspects, other than just monetary sovereignty. And literally the other day, I was telling my wife, I was like, damn it, do you know how many more Bitcoin we could have had if we didn't buy that farm?
Yeah.
Right? So it's always a double-edged sword.
It is.
And at the end of the day, you're like, man, if I would have bought the Bitcoin and just waited 4 years, what kind of farm could I have had then?
Totally.
So it's always an internal voice. And other Bitcoiners I've talked to that have way more coins than I do, I've always said, like, you got to be able to enjoy life here, and you've got to be able to build a future for your family that goes beyond just monetary wealth. And so they encourage me to, like, if you can do it without selling the Bitcoin, awesome, but don't like punish yourself in forever. You know what I mean? So it's a balance.
It is. And so, and I say this, and maybe I'm projecting, I keep saying, I've been talking about it a lot recently. I'm using Bitcoin to get more out of my life. I'm not using my life to get more Bitcoin. And there's a fundamental difference in those two perspectives. And so
perfectly said.
Yeah, it's like, it really makes you dig deep. Like American Hodl, I've been listening to him for a long time, and he talks about how painful how hard and painful hodling can be, right? And like conceptually, I get it, but there's been like over the last couple of months, as I'm looking to relocate and I'm trying to figure out how to do, I don't know, make the changes that I want to make. Like I really get a lot of the things. Like now I'm experiencing it much more firsthand than I was in the past, as I listened to him talk about his experience in Bitcoin. But that's the thing, like, it is real. I think an abundance mentality is very important. I do think that, humanity, all of humanity forever has Bitcoin, 21 million forever. That's enough Bitcoin forever. Everybody has enough Bitcoin. The fact that I own no real estate, no dollar derivatives, no other investable asset other than Bitcoin is downward price pressure on all those other assets. It's demonetizing real estate. That's contributing to help, get rid of homelessness. The fact that BlackRock clients, because there's another thing, side little tangent. People refer to BlackRock like it's some group of individuals that are running this fund just for the individuals that run the fund. Like BlackRock is a company that manages other people's wealth, and they want to get paid to do it. And they happen to have done things that are unethical and have second and third order effects that are really negative as a result of the system in the game that they were playing. And interstage left comes Bitcoin, and the game is now changed. And so the BlackRock is offering to its clients, and its clients are purchasing through BlackRock Bitcoin, which is preventing or at least contributing to BlackRock purchasing less single-family homes in America, which is helping to contribute to homes being more affordable for people. So the fact that I'm not participating in any of these other markets or any of these other investable assets is helping to make things more abundant for other people. And so the fact I'm buying Bitcoin, the fact BlackRock's buying Bitcoin, everybody who's buying Bitcoin, they are making the lives better for people who don't own Bitcoin. So there is also a little bit of this like deeper understanding that you could say that I try to embody that helps me to not live in that place of frustration or fear or concern or whatever, where I'm yelling at the world, like, you got to get Bitcoin, you got to get to one coin, or you'll never have enough coin. You don't have enough coin. I think that that's all predicated upon a mentality that came from the BB world. We live in the AB world. It's a fundamentally different reality. We have a monetary protocol that's indestructible. The base layer will not be destructed. It's logical to think that there's going to be attacks and FUD and issues and chaos and controversy, and this is going to be a little bit of a bumpy thing, but we're moving, I believe, with a high level of probability or certainty into a future that's better for everybody. And the more that I focus on that, the better I feel. And at the very least, it's just selfish. I feel better, right? But I also do believe in my literal life experience that the quality of my life experience is getting better, as well as my purchasing power and my optionality is increasing. And it is that feedback loop of manifesting a better experience for yourself. And it's spiraling upwards forever. It's a beautiful thing.
It's a beautiful thing. Eric, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us.
Yeah, man, it was a pleasure.
We appreciate you. We appreciate your context and all the great wisdom you're delivering to the community. Tell everybody where they can find you and how they might be able to get in touch with you should they want to.
Yeah, so I'm on X. My handle is Eric V Stacks, ERIC V STACKS. And you could message me there, and I post videos. I haven't been posting videos for the last couple of months, really. I've been doing a lot of traveling, and then also doing a lot of reflecting or integrating and trying to figure out, who am I? What am I doing? What does it all mean? And so I've kind of gone a little more inward after doing a lot of hyper socializing. And I guess one of the things that I can say to add on to what Michelle and I were talking about, sharing my Bitcoin story and connecting with other Bitcoiners has been the most transformative and beautiful experience for me in my life in so many ways. And I've had to, I can't even, I've met so many people. It's like, that's why I've been kind of quiet on Twitter recently. Cause I just had to integrate and kind of like, let it all sink in. I've been hyper socializing and made so many connections with so many like-minded, optimistic, happy people working on building and ushering in this new and abundant and beautiful future. It's been a very special thing. And I definitely encourage people to socialize with other Bitcoiners for sure. It's a very, very profound experience for sure.
That's awesome. Thank you, Eric. Please keep us in the loop of what you end up doing.
Yes.
Your invitation to come to Florida is always open. We'd love to have
Sounds
have you
good.
here and show you around. And till next time, thanks again, buddy.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Peace. All right. That was awesome.
Cool, man. Yeah, I quit drinking coffee. Yeah.
My producer's asking me to say like and subscribe real quick. So hold on one second. All right, guys. That was an awesome podcast with Eric. Please like and subscribe. Share this video with all of your friends. Let's orange pill the world. We love you. Take care.
Yes. Like and subscribe, everybody.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you gave up coffee, huh?
Yeah. It's like 10 days ago or so. I found that like I was, I was struggling with the coffee. I was drinking probably more than I should, and I just felt like I was in a lower baseline energetic state. I'd drink coffee, I'd come up, and then I'd drop down to this lower state. And by not drinking the coffee, I'm like, my energy levels are a little bit better. I'm not peaking in this like really like, coffeeed out state or whatever. But it's also I've had to like kind of recalibrate a little bit, and I've had a little cognitive sledge. I'm like coming out of it because I've been drinking coffee every day for the last many years now. It's hard, and I think, dude, coffee is fucking fiat as fuck. You know what you need if you're tired? This is at least what I think, but my humble opinion. You need a nap if you're tired, not a cup of Joe. You know what you need? You need to stack some sats and take a nap. That's what I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, man.
We just... I tried giving up coffee for a while, and then I would I'm just going to have a half a cup, and then back and forth. And then my wife and I found I forget the name of the brand. It's expensive as fuck, but it's this organic coffee with all the mushrooms in it.
Yes.
Oh, that's a game changer.
Yeah,
I feel great on that.
Yeah.
Like it's more of just like a sustained mellow, and I don't get all dehydrated, and I just feel good. My brain is clicking.
Yep.
No, it's not mud water. It's but anyways.
One of the problems, the big problem with coffee is that the beans, when they harvest them, they mold, and then
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like with cannabis,
it hydrates you, right?
Because you get hit with a mycotoxin. If cannabis is moldy, it has to be thrown away because I'm not roasting it in a roaster to make it so you can't tell that it had mycelium growing on it, and so the mycotoxin kind of wreaks havoc on our system, and you can get mycotoxin free coffee. But the problem that I experience is if I'm drinking coffee, I got to have coffee every day. And then if I'm like traveling or doing things, then I'm drinking shitty coffee and I'm getting this mycotoxin, and it's bad for your pancreas and liver. And so that's kind of the big catalyst for me, I would say, in addition to, it's just like, dude, it's like just running on a deficit though. Like you got to pay it back at some point. Like you can't, like you need rest. You need to satiate your body with nutrition and rest. Like you can't just power through with coffee. And so, I actually watched a YouTube video recently on the history of coffee because I wanted to see if I could, if anybody who was documenting the history of coffee, commented on any correlation. I wanted to make a correlation with the increase in coffee consumption relative to the debasement of the currency. So as their lives are getting harder, they're having to work harder and drink more coffee and whatever. I didn't come up with anything riveting, but
I thought there was like a historical reference that coffee was introduced into the factories in order to try and increase productivity.
I'm sure it was.
Something like that was going on in the early days in Europe, from what I understand.
Anyways,
right?
So cool. Well, I definitely enjoyed our conversation.
Michelle, you want to say goodbye?
Yeah. I'll
see you later.
Yes, peace. It's always good to see you. I will.
YouTube.
Yeah,
bring your wife to Florida.
Yeah,
West Coast.
Maybe we'll come there. I don't know, and sometime this winter, take a trip.
Okay. Yeah, it's great in the winter.
Yeah,
it's beautiful, and I'm telling you, I would never live on the East Coast of Florida.
Yeah.
It's just not my vibe.
Yeah.
We have a big cannabis nutrient company.
We do.
No shit. Yeah.
Sunburn is based here.
Nice.
That's a dispensary, right? I'll get you the name of the nutrient company. It's a pretty big nutrient company.
Yeah. Cool.
No, but seriously, the West Coast is totally different than the East Coast. And there's so many people here too. So you would have friends and community right away. Obviously we're here, but Tampa has a massive Bitcoin community, which is north of us, and then south of us is Naples. There's Bob Burnett is there, Carly with Bitcoin. There's several people that work for Bitcoin Magazine that are there. There's so many Bitcoiners over here.
Yeah.
There's
Where in
Tampa
Florida
Bay
are
Bitcoin.
you? Reed loves in Miami now.
We're in Sarasota.
Sarasota.
And then so basically Tampa is north of us. And then the Crystal River that you were asking about is like north of Tampa.
Yeah.
That's a little bit like Florida meets Humboldt.
Yeah, that's going to be your, like,
Crystal
that's
River
the
North.
Humboldt of Florida. So you might
Nice.
like it. And it's beautiful. You can get land out there.
It's literally called Our Lost Coast.
Nice.
Lost
That's
Coast.
funny. That's,
It's
yeah.
the Lost Coast of Florida versus the Lost Coast of California.
Yes.
It's like Mendocino of
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, see if you can come, even if it's for like just a long weekend over the winter,
Yeah.
and come literally anywhere on the West Coast, Tampa, Sarasota, Venice, Naples, Fort Myers. It's amazing.
Sounds good. Yeah. I will,
Yeah.
I'm going to have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, talk to her, come for a visit, and we'll recruit her for you. So, but thank you for talking to Paul and talking to us and doing this.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Hear you going off for sure.
Yeah, I love these conversations. It's they're definitely enjoyable.
For sure, and inspiring for everyone. So.